Good morning, everybody. Let's continue into our second session. A very, very warm welcome from my side. My name is Dorothea Schmidt-Klau. I'm working in the Employment Policy Department. I'm replacing actually the branch chief of the skills branch because he cannot be with us, unfortunately, today. But given that the bread and butter of the Employment Policy Department of the ILO is policy coherence and dialogue between stakeholders, I hope I can somehow replace him. The title of the session is Policy Coherence and Social Dialogue for Skills Development in a Just Transition. And let me remind you from the very beginning, we don't talk about policy coherence in general. We talk about policy coherence between environmental policies on the one side and skills policies on the other side. And all this we do with the background of greening the economy. So let's just keep this in mind for all the conversation we have. My connection with the report, apart from working in the same department, is actually that when the first report came out in 2011, I was an employment specialist in the field. And if I've ever seen a bestseller coming out of the ILO, it certainly was that report. We couldn't even get enough copies quick enough to give to our constituents. It was really a very, as Olga said, unexpected but great success. And I think it really, really helped us to open doors to this subject in many countries. Before I introduce the panel, I need to make a technical remark. Of course, it's impossible that all of you speak today. Some of you will get the chance by asking questions at the end of this session and also during other sessions, but we want to make best use of the fact that you are all here. This is why we have a poll where we ask you to answer 3 questions. You actually see the 3 questions there. So what you would have to do, and we are really, really keen to get as many answers as possible, is you go to the Slido.com webpage, so www.slido.com, and you insert the code D185. Once you do that, there is a tag which says poll. You click on it, you find the 3 questions, you answer the questions, and you send it off. You can do this anytime as of now until 3:30 this afternoon. And we will present the results of the poll at the 5th session. I think this is where it's going to be presented. Now, let me turn to the most important thing of this event, the panelists. I will just quickly introduce them. We have Roberto Soares Santos. He's the Secretary General of the IOE. We have Mrs. Sharon Barrow, who will join us via video message. She's the General Secretary of ITUC. And we also have from ITUC the Climate Officer, who is Mr. Bert de Wel. He's with us on the panel. We have Mrs. Marissa Legaspi. She's the Executive Director for the Planning, Technical Education and Skills Development Authority in the Philippines. We have Mr. Federico Berrera, Chief Inspector of the Ministry of Education of France, and we already heard a lot of interesting things about France in the first session. We have Ms. Lebogang Moulaisi. I'm not sure whether this is correct, but she's a Social Development Policy Coordinator in the Congress of South African Trade Unions. And we have Ms. Sheena Meyers-Granville. She's the Executive Director of Barbados Employers Confederation. So as you can see, we have a true tripartite panel, and I'm sure we are going to learn a lot from them. Now, this morning over breakfast, I have 2 kids, and one of them said to me, "Mommy, you're a bit nervous. Why are you so nervous?" And I said, "Well, listen, I'm going to talk to some very important people today, and it's going to be, am I going to ask the right questions?" And then my son said, "Well, what will you talk about?" And I said, "Well, it's about a greener future, and we are doing this mainly for you." And he said, "Can you ask them a question from my side?" And I said, "I try." And he said, why are we killing our planet, even though we know we don't have another one? Is it because we are stupid? And I said to him, listen, I don't think it's because we are stupid. It's just not everybody knows what we can do about it. And he says, but if it's not everybody, could not those who know talk to those who don't know? And then my daughter came in and she said, and then once they start talking, they will find new solutions. And I thought, isn't that a great summary of exactly what we are talking about today? Dialoguing for a green economy, coordinating policies so that the left hand knows what the right hand does, that we don't do things in isolation. Because one thing is for sure, we all have the same goal, but only if we work together and if we talk to one another, it's going to happen. So I'm sure this panel will bring us forward into learning how we can actually work together, how social dialogue functions, especially when it comes to greening of economies. So let me immediately move to the first round of questions. We will have 2 rounds of questions. The first one will give the speakers a bit more time to answer. A bit more means 3 to 5 minutes, and we are already running a bit late, so please respect the time. And the first question goes to Mr. Suarez Santos. We know by now that policy coherence is not easy at all. In the 32 countries analyzed, and Olga has presented the results, we found excellent coordination mechanisms. We found interministerial coordination platforms. We found skills councils, sector skills councils, advisory boards, task forces, and as Olga said, it doesn't matter what you have as long as you have it. And we clearly saw if you have something, it leads to higher levels of coherence and higher relevance of the skills that are produced. So obviously it works. But we also saw cases where we have something and it doesn't work. So having the institution alone doesn't make things happen. So we need on the table, at all these conversations, at all these institutions, we need workers and employers. So my question is, and actually it's a whole series of questions, what does really work? What does really work in these coordination institutions? How do we ensure the involvement of the private sector, of employers? How can they help to identify the real skills needs for a just transition? And how do we get from identifying the needs to actually producing and using these skills? So this is my questions for Roberto Sanchez.
That I have to answer in 5 minutes.
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank you, and also to congratulate you for this report. You know, we'll have the discussion of the ILC centenary. We are, as employers, pushing strongly for a much more skills approach of ILO. And this is the kind of material, really, that will make a difference. Essentially, I've just been reading it, and I've just been listening to the presentation down before. This would be critically important to assure employability. And we need really more resources for the ILO to do that. The question you were raising, Dorothea, is on one side, what works for identifying skills, and also linked to the private sector. On the other side, how do you implement it in terms of policy? We know quite a lot what doesn't work. We are very good at that. Of course, we need all to assume that if we do not work with business, we do not work with employers, the efforts will be limited in terms of results. And that has happened in the past. And that is continually happening. The educational systems, because of many reasons, do not really work effectively with employers and workers, and especially with the business community. Of course, when you talk about business, you talk about very huge and diverse realities. I mean, if you see small and medium companies in developing economies where you have informality, when they have also huge pressure in terms of cost, huge pressure in terms of access to finance, that's not the same reality of developed economies where you have a completely different institutional setup. So there is an element of diversity that we need to take into account. But if you ask me what works in identifying skills, I have to answer, sorry. The first answer is very difficult nowadays to predict what the skills will be in the future. And predictability is becoming more and more the rule. Also, I have to say that business models are changing drastically. We have jointly made an effort with ILO ACTEM to identify what are the trends in terms of new business models. And again, one of the findings is related precisely to this unpredictability, but it's clear, more and more clear, that on the top priorities of employers in a survey that we did with 500 companies is becoming skills and skills anticipation. If you talk about effective partnerships with educational systems, what we see now is that still there is a lot of educational, I would say, ideological prejudice to work with business in many parts of the world. And that we have to overcome that. Working between educational institutions and business is not bad, it's all the contrary. We also see many legal obstacles, some of them very absurd, in the way you operate and you guarantee, assure effective partnerships. We also see some communication language obstacles in the way educational systems work and business skills and demands are working. And of course, as I said before, there's a cost element. Another element to take into account, identifying technical skills, even in the green economy, is becoming more and more complicated. But what is clear with all the literature, and this report also refers to that, I mean, it refers to the 25 million jobs that will be created in the green economy. It will talk about, yes, loss of jobs will not be so huge, but it's conditional on training. So if we do not have the training, that will not be a driver of new opportunities. And on this, soft skills are becoming, badly called soft skills, are becoming a key driver. What we call also learnability. My capacity to anticipate, my capacity to innovate, my capacity to build teamwork, my capacity also to analyze. This is becoming a key driver for employability. And that has to do with the green economy. Because if I manage in the workplace to have an approach of from workers and from employers on waste disposal, on use of energy, on printing, on water consumption, and on mobility, we are making a huge difference for the entire society. We spend like at least 8 hours a day in the workplace. It's a learning process to work at the workplace. Those are my thoughts for identifying. If you talk about implementing, we have been much focus on lifelong learning systems, which are working in many countries because we have solid institutions, we have a capacity to implement, but there are also limitations in the existing current lifelong learning systems, even the tripartite ones. What we see coming as a huge trend is informal learning as a coming rule. Digital learning, which is accessible, which is cheap, sometimes complementing the formal learning, is not a panacea, but it's becoming a great trend, also for the green economy. And sorry, I have to say also that the formal recognitions of competence that we have created in many countries are not working because of this unpredictability. And what we are starting to see is a kind of informal recognitions of skills process by digital means, which is overcoming borders. So if you really want to make a difference also for this green economy, you need absolutely, as government, as a business community, through the associations of business, through the employees' organization, to start working on these realities of informal recognition and digital informal learning. Sorry if I was more than 5 minutes.
Exactly 5 minutes. Thank you very much. That's a very interesting point of view. And of course, he was very much on time, I told him. Thank you very much for this view. It's very interesting to hear how much you, from your point of view, struggle in terms of getting involved into the dialogue, even though I don't think there can really be any doubt that it's, at the end of the day, it's entrepreneurs who know best what skills they need. So from a theoretical point of view, it seems surprising. Let us now turn to the video message of Mrs. Barrow. We have seen also in the study that Olga presented that there is a bit less or a lot less involvement of trade unions compared to employers in many countries when it comes to this issue of green skills and the coordination of policy areas. We, on the other hand, saw some front runners that show the opposite. And these front runners, like France, Germany, Denmark, were the key ones we saw. There we see they are successful in policy coordination and they have an equal participation of workers and employers. So obviously, there is part of the success story. Now, the question is, of course, why, if we know that this is the part of the success story, is it not happening everywhere? So the question we kind of asked to Ms. Barrow was, why is it so important to have equal participation of workers in skills development initiatives, especially in our attempt to green economies, and why is it so difficult? So can I please ask for the video message?
Friends and colleagues, this is a critical discussion. I very much regret not being able to be with you in person. We have just over 10 years to stabilise the planet. We know that that is a huge systemic shift in all of our sectors, because all industries, all businesses must indeed move towards a situation where clean energy, clean technology, that these processes are part of the future. We need to have a circular economy, both to reduce emissions and meet the test of stabilising the planet, but indeed also to live within planetary boundaries. Again, these shifts will take all of us, employers, unions, government. Unless social dialogue sits at the heart of just transition agreements, we will not build the trust of working people so that governments can raise ambition, employers can find a stability within a cleaner economy, and we can secure jobs and indeed just conditions, fundamental rights, and of course effect a just transition. In regard to a just transition, it's very simple. It means that we have to secure pensions for older workers. We have to look at how we pay for income support, skills development and redeployment support for younger workers where there is in fact displacement. A lot of the shift will be simply new skills in jobs in existing industries. That too is really critical. Stable jobs, stable income, skills development, support of all parties to make that possible. And then, of course, we must also look to investing in communities and new jobs. And again, the skills component of both entry-level skills and lifelong learning becomes critical. Why is it important that employers and unions are absolutely part of this development? There are a number of reasons, but the most critical is that workers need to feel the confidence of having their skills recognised today, of understanding what skills they need to build on top of that knowledge and experience for the future. Employers need to know that the skills mix will be available for them to make the shift to cleaner economies. And of course, governments are vital to work with the social partners to make that happen. We know that where skills have actually been part of an economic fundamental, that this has been in countries where there has been bipartite and tripartite arrangements. We know apprenticeships work best when employers and trade unions work together, where governments support the development of apprenticeships, traineeships, with fundamental rights underpinning them. We know that lifelong learning is not possible if the social partners aren't engaged, and there are really good developments in countries around the world where employers and unions are bargaining for the funds to make the just transition possible, whether it's climate or whether it's technology, and the effective shift in work that requires on the basis of skills, sometimes jobs, but sometimes simply additional skills in a transfer of tasks. So we would say to you, social dialogue based on fundamental rights where workers have the understanding they'll be guaranteed secure work, safe work, minimum living wages, collective bargaining rights, and of course the rule of law. Mandated due diligence is also critical, so companies take responsibility for looking towards avoiding the risk of human rights and labour rights abuse. But at the core, social dialogue is the heart of making decent work possible. Full employment, fundamental rights, the capacity for just transitions, that's what decent work in a zero-emission economy requires. Thank you. I look forward to the discussions and hearing of the outcomes. My colleague Bert is there to answer questions, but we really do appreciate the support with the ILO and the employers that we are building for just transition. Thank you. Transition. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. It's very interesting to see how much we still have to promote such basic facts that, you know, social partners need to be around the table when we discuss of the future of all of us. But it's good that we confirm this again and again, especially when it comes to this rather new area of greening of economies. We have already heard in the first session about France being a front runner in both studies, in the 2011 study and the 2019 one. And if we look a bit closer at France, and that's what actually happened in the first session, there are two features which are particularly remarkable. So the one thing is the so-called environmental roundtables. And this is an institution where government ministers, the National Statistical Institute, research bodies, regional employment and training observatories, social partners and civil society come together and discuss. In addition, this happens at the national, at the sectoral, and the regional level. So it's not just something happening somewhere in Paris and the rest of the country not knowing what happens. It happens everywhere. On top of this, and this is what we heard this morning, we have the Observatory for Jobs and Occupations of the Green Economy, which is also something very unique. Now, my question to Mr. Berera is, can you share with us some highlights of the value of this multi-stakeholder engagement in skills policies for green jobs, especially the value of having such a dialogue at different levels?
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I was quite happy to read that we were in the front runners in terms of social dialogue. Well, we've had ups and downs, I suppose, but apart from what you see on the news, there is indeed a strong history of social dialogue in the way we organize our society. And indeed, with this green transition, we see the value of this dialogue. So the question is to try and share experiences. I will share two experiences, one on the national level and one on the local level. Is that right? Something that I'd like to point out is the way skills are developed in France. I work for the Ministry of Education, and we're in charge of defining what the training courses are, and that are then implemented in different schools and universities across the country. Well, the process underlying the development of courses starts with advisory panels that are built with social partners. And we ask those social partners, before doing anything, do you think it's worth it? What's the need? Is there a need? We think that maybe there is a need to develop this and that skills, in particular to bring this green transition into jobs that are to come. But maybe we're wrong. So these advisory panels that have been put into place for many years now have that first job to establish the need for such and such certification. Then comes the role of administration to turn these needs for skills into training courses. But What is interesting in this, I think, process is that the social partners have now the possibility to stop things. It's not just an advice that they give to the administration that we should do this or that. They actually have the power to say, no, don't do it, it's worthless, or do that, because we do need it for future skills. That's a new thing. And another aspect that is a fallout of what was mentioned earlier today with the Grenelle de l'Environnement in 2007 or the COP21 is that we're trying to broaden our views, and even across ministries, the Ministry of Ecology works with the Ministry of Education, who can work with the Ministry of Labour and so on. And so these advisory panels are joined together to have a broad view of how green aspects can impact any type of skills development that we're working on. So this is, I suppose, on a national level, the input of this broadened vision. On a local level, we like to work on project-based implementation of skills development. If on one side, at the national level, we develop possible courses, then it's up to the regions to decide what to do where. And if I may take an example of mobility issues when you live in Paris are not the same mobility issues when you live in the Creuse, which is a rural region in the center of France. And that means that the potential for development, the potential for jobs are going to be quite different from one area to the other, and the solutions are going to be quite different when you have a high-density population, such as Paris, at a low-density population in a rural area. And so on a local level, there are those many tools that we can use, but one has been mentioned again this morning, the Contrat Territorial Environnemental, which idea is to take an environmental issue, see how it impacts the local economy, and find solutions hand in hand with the local stakeholders, economy, administrations, businesses, of course, and they can use the skill development tools that we develop at the national level, but really they choose which ones are the more relevant for their issues locally. And this seems to be rather effective. It's in the form that's been mentioned before is rather new, but the principle that are behind this form is not so new. And maybe one aspect which also guarantees, or at least we hope so, that the social partners and the administrations work hand in hand is that funding has to be shared. €1 brought by the state or by the public administrations means €1 brought by businesses and social partners. And so that projects, you know, when you share the costs, when you share the financial issues, it's maybe a bit more likely to work together and be effective in your policy. That's maybe the first few things that I could share with you at this stage.
Thank you very much. I find these elements very interesting, and obviously they have an impact. The front runner label you got mainly for policy coordination. So just to make this very clear, but policy coordination through social dialogue. The Philippines is another success story. In 2016, a Green Jobs Act was adopted, and the content of this is really how to incentivize the greening of the economy on all sides. Whoever is involved might find an incentive in this Jobs Act. It's also promoting training. It clearly states that training, giving people the right skills, is key to the success. And because of this importance of skills, there is a National Green Jobs Human Development Plan under construction that will exactly take this into account and bring us a step closer to implementation. Now, my question to Ms. Legaspi is, what do you see as the key challenges in this process? Is it the cross-ministerial coordination? Is it the involvement of employers and workers? Is it how to move to implementation? What is your advice for other countries?
Thank you, Dorothea, and good morning, dear fellow delegates. As you know, the Philippines is among the most vulnerable countries to climate risks, and this poses daunting challenges on all fronts. Thus, it has to have a very high stake in ensuring the resilience of communities and ensuring that adverse effects of climate change are minimized as much as possible, if not totally eliminated. And we know that this cannot be done by government alone. And that's why in the Philippines we adopt a whole nation, a whole government, and a whole of institution approach in addressing these concerns. In the field of skills development, which is a key component of major policies that address environmental sustainability in the Philippines, the participation of key stakeholders, the industry, workers, the academe, is very crucial to ensure that we come up with relevant policies and programs, especially skills training programs that are of high quality and that ensures efficiency and effectiveness. Now, let me share with you first, of course, in addition to the challenges mentioned by Dorothea, some of the key initiatives that we are doing in the Philippines that promotes, of course, interministerial collaboration as well as participation of our key stakeholders. And as mentioned earlier, the Philippines has passed the Philippine Green Jobs Act in 2016. This is one of the pioneering legislations in our part of the world in Southeast Asia. It is in an early stage of implementation, I should say, but maybe the passage itself of the act is a success already because it has to hurdle a lot of challenges before it passes. And the implementation of this Philippine Green Jobs Act requires interministerial collaboration. In fact, the law mandates 18 government agencies to lead in the implementation, and this means an adoption of a whole government approach. So TESDA's role in the implementation of this law is focused on skills development, ensuring that there is adequate supply of the skilled personnel needed for the country's transition to the green economy. And TVET is seen as a flexible response to address these challenges because it can either be an instrument to reskill the workers who are displaced by this transition. It can be also a tool to enhance their skills to be adaptable to these changing technologies brought about by this transition. And it's also social protection and safety net for our people who will be affected by this transition. Now, the groundwork to further strengthen the promulgation of our National Technical Education and Skills Development Plan. This is our national roadmap on technical vocational education training. And this is anchored on the Philippine Development Plan. Our roadmap envisions a vibrant quality TVET for decent work and sustainable inclusive growth, and recognizes TVET's role in supporting the government's policy on protecting and caring for the environment. The plan also articulates the objective of meeting the demands of greening industries, as well as the creation of green economy workers imbued with 21st century skills. And this plan was formulated through an interagency mechanism and has broad participation of various stakeholders from the private sector, the industry, labor, and the academe. So part of the fulfillment of this objective is the incorporation of green competencies in our training programs and curriculum. To date, we have what we call 24 training regulations or competency standards that have already incorporated with green competency components, and TESDA is pursuing the inclusion of green skills in the basic competency module to ensure its application in all qualifications, regardless of jobs and industrial settings. The greening of competency standards, including the curriculum, shall promote the creation of green jobs and decent work. And these training regulations that are being developed through TESDA is promulgated by a TESDA board, which is the highest policy-making body, which is tripartite in nature, with participation of industry, labor, academe, and government in decision-making. And these competency standards are developed by the industry experts from various economic sectors. Even prior to the 2015 Paris Agreement, we have already laid also the groundwork to provide green skills for green jobs through the establishment of a TESDA Green Technology Center, which is essentially TESDA's leading entity that shall spearhead the cultivation of Green Tibet in the Philippines. And this Green Technology Center was established with the support of the Federation of Filipino-Chinese Chamber of Commerce and Industry, an industry association in the Philippines. So you see in all these aspects, we see collaboration between government and the private sector. Now, we are grateful for the support of the ILO in our green initiatives, and in 2018, TESDA, in partnership with ILO, has conducted a forum on greening the Philippine-Tibet system. And this forum discussed ways forward towards greening Tibet in the Philippines, including our Tibet institutions, trainers, and training programs. And this is part of the Just Transition initiatives, wherein the Philippines is one of the 3 pilot countries supported by ILO for the application of the policy guidelines for just transition. And the overall objective of this project is to build the capacity of Philippine constituents in operationalizing the Green Jobs Act and leveraging the process of structural change towards a sustainable, climate-resilient pathway that create decent jobs. Through this forum, participated by various sectors from government, industry, labor, and academe, we are able to come up with a framework for greening the Philippine-Tibet system for all our operating units, including public and private Tibet institutions and other relevant Tibet partners. The framework consists of 5 components, namely green jobs or skills, green policies, green competency standards and training regulations, green culture, and green community. This framework is an adaptation of the UNESCO UNIBOX Whole of Institution approach on Green Tibet. So TESDA, as the authority of Philippine Tibet, is the promoter, manager, and regulator of all these components to achieve the Green Tibet system in the country. So some of the key challenges and lessons that we learned from this cross-ministerial and policy coordination, including the participation of key stakeholders for a greater involvement of social partners in skills response, include the following: a need for a unifying framework anchored on a national policy. So it is good to have our Philippine National Development Plan, which exposes sustainable development as one of its major policies. And this is, of course, the basis for which our national TSD plan was also formulated. We need also a champion and a steerer. Even with the whole of government approach, we need somebody to lead in calling these agencies to initiate and devise strategies for which convergence and better harmonization of policies and programs are made. I think for greater involvement also of the private sector, both from industry academe and labor, we need to establish incentive and reward mechanisms, particularly those that are related to green jobs and green skills. We also need more information, statistics, researches on green jobs and green skills, and pertinent policies and programs, and more intensive promotion of such. Government agencies and social partners need to be better informed in order to make better decisions, and evidence-based policies and programs need to be strengthened. So I think for now, those are my thoughts.
Yes, thank you. That was already a lot. You thank us for helping you in the country. We thank you for giving us the opportunity to help you. And the cooperation we see happening in your country is actually a very good example of how the ILO can actually help countries. I also found very interesting your notion that everything needs to be greened. It's not just one element, it's all the elements that need to be green so that we look for a greener future. We know that a green transition can mean growth, and it can mean more and better jobs, but it doesn't always happen. Now, South Africa is well known for its very strong institutions for interministerial collaboration and its strong involvement of social partners, especially at the sectoral level. There are sector education and training. There is the Sector Education and Training Authority that makes sure that this actually happens. And now my question is, if you already have such very well-established institutions, how can they be used for actually making sure that green jobs become a reality? And how do you actually ensure that in these institutions it works so well when it comes to the engagement of employers and workers? And this question, of course, goes to you.
Thank you very much, Dorothea. I think I'll start with the role that the labor unions have played in the platforms of social dialogue. So we've played a vital role in determining the key deliverables of the CETAs as far as skills development and worker education is concerned. Labor unions are fortunately afforded the opportunity to engage in platforms of social dialogue in order to review curriculum, input on policy development, as well as to align skills development to what the labor market needs as current and relevant skills for South Africa. So more specifically to jobs and skills development within the green economy. More recently, what had happened was 2 years ago, we had a bit of a crossroad moment where 4 to 5 coal power stations were going to be shut down. As such, it would implicate 10,000 workers who would find themselves directly implicated and become very vulnerable because they would not have jobs in a specific region of South Africa. So what that did is it shocked a lot of social partners into action. So we then converged as social partners in NADLAC to then determine how we can then create this shock absorber for workers that are currently affected by imminent job loss. Our engagements at a NADLAC level between government, business, community, as well as labor resulted in the development as well as the strengthening of a training layoff scheme. So the training layoff scheme, they are financed by the National Skills Fund and the Sector Education and Training Authority. The scheme is available to vulnerable workers who otherwise would have lost employment due to operational requirements. So this is a training layoff scheme is then entered into by an employer and the affected employees. We make use of the Commission for Counsel, Mediation and Arbitration to facilitate such an engagement with workers as well as their employers. Now, we do have this great policy that is working for both the employer as well as the employee. There's definite room for improvement so that it can be strengthened and streamlined for more and more employees that find themselves vulnerable because of a move from coal-intensive to a more resilient, climate-resilient economy. So as a result, in order to strengthen a training layoff scheme, there still needs to be more engagement via social dialogue on our social platforms. And the way that we can strengthen it is we definitely need to have a strong link between a training layoff scheme as well as an industrial policy and industrial plan. Because currently what the training layoff scheme is, it does train workers to upskill them in order to have access to various job opportunities. But we don't necessarily point them in the direction as to after here, where do you go? So we don't make that link quite evident as part of the training layoff scheme. So what needs to happen is that we have to have a stronger link between the actual layoff scheme as well as available job opportunities, so that when you are retrenched from whichever plant, you are then directed to a particular industry where you can then ply your trade after you have been upskilled. There is also a special need for us to develop a comprehensive social security policy within South Africa, so that those who may not or may be at an age where they may not necessarily find it reasonable to upskill themselves, they can then take whatever social security policy is in place, so they are then able to opt for a retirement of some sort. So those are the various things that we need to do to link to the current institutional arrangements that we have in place to ensure that we strengthen current policies, we strengthen current institutions, so that when we talk about a move to a more climate resilient economy, we have workers on board. Currently, what is the case is that when we talk about moving workers, because we haven't created a substantial plan in place, we create a lot of uncertainty, and it's also seen as a bit of a, Labour wants to take a bit of a step back and not want to enter into negotiations about moving to a climate resilient economy, because they feel that they'll be the biggest loser and their jobs their jobs will be vulnerable at the end of the day. So if we can establish those links and we can link it with an industrial plan and industrial policy, we'll make it easier for workers to move, will make them more amenable to a change in the way that we produce our mineral resources. I think another thing that we can do to strengthen, and this is a victory on the side of all social partners, in the job summit that we had last year, it was a presidential job summit where we were making commitments with social partners in order to enhance job creation and make the process of job creation easier in the South African context. As everyone might know, we are plagued with high levels of unemployment. So what was one of the commitments, particularly with regards to the just transition and climate change, was that there needs to be a statutory body at the level of the presidency where social partners can then come together and develop a plan as to how we then transition. I think the report that was made reference to, we deal a lot with capacitation on the concept of the just transition. So we educate people on what the transition actually means. But as to developing a plan as to how we move in the direction of a just transition, that seems to be murky waters right now. So what we are then going to do at the level of the presidency is to develop such a plan. And what's good about this is that if it's at the level of the presidency, it becomes easier to then influence each and every body that is underneath the presidency. So your ministerial departments, your platforms for social dialogue, it's easier if they receive the mandate from the presidency. So we don't have this problem of the silos, where someone is doing a just transition plan in transport, in energy, in whichever sector. What we do is that we are able to then integrate this plan so that it's easier for it to then cascade down to the various departments that exist underneath the presidency. So that's the work that we're doing in South Africa as far as the just transition is concerned.
Thank you very much. I think this was also very interesting. I found especially this link that you have to establish two sectoral policies, but also two social protection policies. That's certainly key if we want to move forward. Now, we come to our last best practice from the Barbados, which gives us another good example of how important social dialogue actually is in a just transition and in identifying the right skills and coordinate policies. The question now to you is, how do you make sure that engagement from the employer side actually does happen. Are sectoral approaches enough? What else do we have to do? How can we help to actually make it happen? What are your experiences? So that's for you, Ms. Meyers-Granville.
Good morning, everyone, members of the panel and participants here. In Barbados, part of the Caribbean, we remain extremely vulnerable to climate change and its effects. We see it every year with the magnitude of the hurricanes that we experience and now the increasing frequency of those hurricanes. So any conversation about green economy and climate resilience is very important for us. In Barbados, we have some sectoral approaches towards it. I will say one of the most notable one occurs within our renewable energy sector. We have a Renewable Energy Association, and that is built, that's comprised of employers within that industry. And I found that when we look at the renewable energy sector, we definitely see the movements that they have made in terms of renewable energy and its use and building out the skill set within the country. We also recently last year, we changed our government, and we now have a Ministry of the Blue Economy. We are a small island nation, and obviously you can think about the historical impact the sea has had for us, and therefore having that designated Ministry of the Blue Economy and looking at where do we build out the blue economy and having sustainable practices in that field. So we do have that sectoral approach. However, while it has been valuable, we can definitely see areas where it has not necessarily worked for us. So we see those particular sectors receiving attention, but then there are other areas where we would need to place some emphasis on, and they are not getting the emphasis that they would potentially need. I will cite 2 examples. I can immediately think about agriculture and sustainable farming and food security. The Agricultural Society, I'm sure they would want to have more input in terms of sustainable farming practices and how we can have our food secured in Barbados. And then I mentioned at the onset the impact of hurricanes. So what about sustainable buildings? How do we improve our construction sector to the point where our buildings are more resilient to the natural disasters that we now face? So I can see where, yes, we have some successes in the sectoral approach, but we need to also have some additional conversations at a national level, because there are some sectors which would need additional support to build out their green economy, their greening framework, so that they can have the skills needed for those sectors. I can say that what we have, I can see that one sector is being employer-driven. There's another sector where we have a lot of small businesses, the blue economy, and that is now being led heavily from a ministerial standpoint. So both function in terms of where the lead has come from. But when we look at the sustainable transition, a just transition, we definitely see the need for technical vocational institutions and to have their input. How our system is structured, the TVET institution does have employer input, and in development of skills, there is definitely a strong industry input. So that has worked to our advantage. However, there is a time lag between the adoption of new technologies and training of workers. And that has posed 1 or 2 challenges that we are working through. We're committed to working through that. What has been clear, though, is as a small island developing nation, we have certain things that are heavy on our mind that impact us heavily: our reliance on oil, the impact of climate change, our changing rainfall and weather patterns. We see that businesses have shifted to employing more green technologies in their operations as they try to be more resilient. But what we would need is a national plan which looks at coordinating some of these efforts. So we have those sectoral approaches, but we could definitely benefit from a national plan that coordinates these efforts. I think I would stop there. I think that gives you a good overview of the sectoral and how we would like to have it linked back to the national agenda.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very interesting because usually it's the other way around. You start from the top, you go further down, further down. Now this time we see the need to go further up to make it happen. That's very interesting. And thanks also for the honesty of your answer. We started 10 minutes late. We lost another 10 minutes. So for the second round of questions, I need to ask you to be very, very brief. We have foreseen 2 to 3 minutes. Let's be rather on the 2-minute side. And it's the same question to all panelists. Let us look ahead. What would be your recommendations to countries to advance and achieve meaningful social dialogue and effective partnerships for skills for a just transition? So, Mr. Suarez, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. I have written at least six specific. I didn't refer to productivity. When we talk about green economy, we talk about the strength in productivity, which will surely lead to decent jobs. That's something that we are forgetting. At the end of the day, a driver for decent jobs is a driver based on a productivity growth. So if you really want to make a difference on a just transition approach which is effective, you need a comprehensive and cross-sectoral strategy for productivity growth. For me, that is one of the main drivers. Secondly, I need to stress, and it will not be enough, the mentality approach, the attitude approach from individuals, companies, and workers. So any successful story through social dialogue also needs to focus on how important is attitudes, how important is to change people's minds towards an environmentally friendly and towards a just transition successful approach. Thirdly, I think I referred to that before, but there is still not understandable obstacles for effective cooperation between the educational institutions and I would say the private sector, but also the worker sector to identify skills. Legal, cost, ideological, I would say, obstacles which need to be overcome. Fourth, we have been stressing institutional coherence, which has to do with the strategic plan. Educational institutions need to work much better with labor institutions, much better with environmental institutions in a country. For me, this is the fourth. And fifth, I mean, the content of social dialogue itself needs to modernize, needs to be much more innovative in their approach. Again, that has to do with attitudes, but also has to do with concrete measures that joint employees and workers can push forward to make reality much better in terms of the question that your daughter was asking this morning to you, Dorothea.
Thank you very much. That was, again, right on time. I now turn to Mr. Bert de Wie. He hasn't had a chance to talk yet because we had the video message for ITUC. So please, your recommendations.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here. I'm very happy with the report that has been presented here. I think it will be extremely useful for all the social partners in the countries to develop the skills programs. Sharon has explained, Sharon Burrow, that just transition has some important aspects. Skills development is part of it, respect of rights is important, and social protection. And what I would like to stress again is the need of these just transition policies to get to climate ambition. Because we are very much convinced that at this moment, that is what is lacking. There is not, the policies presented by the countries are lacking the climate ambition that everybody needs. And we are convinced that through just transition policies that bring trust to the people, that will be the only way to get the level of ambition that we need. As we have seen in Spain, where a government has put up a just transition plan, which included skills measures, we saw that this can make important steps forward in difficult sectors related to mining and so on. The Spanish government was even not punished in the elections afterwards. So if you give credible solutions of how people, their jobs will be dealt with in future climate policies, then you will get the support you need. So to get this just transition, there is no silver bullet. We see that especially the unions are sometimes lacking in the implementation. And I see 2 bottom-up suggestions and 1 top-down. The bottom-up is that, yeah, we have to be invited at the table first. If you want us to talk about the measures, the climate policy measures, the skills measures, we have to be invited. And in many countries, this is still not the case. So social dialogue is crucial, but we have to be at the table. Second, once you get us at the table, the union should be prepared to know what they speak about. And that, sadly, is also not always the case. So we are working very hard with our affiliates on capacity building, on making climate policies to work with them. Especially at this moment, we are doing a big campaign with our affiliates on Climate Proof Our Work, where we ask all our affiliates and to go to their members, and their members should ask to their CEO, to their boss, is my company ready for climate policies in the future? Will my job still exist in 5 years, in 10 years? Do we have the right skills and capacities in our company to deal with the challenges of the future? So this is bottom-up. We see good examples. We see many unions working on that. But there is also like a top-down approach to this. Basically, what we want is that all countries have just transition measures in their new climate plans, in their NDC, the nationally determined contributions, the climate plans that have to be renewed next year. All our countries should have a just transition chapter to give trust to the workers that their interests are being taken care of. Many countries have committed to it already through the Just Transition Declaration that was signed in Katowice last year. 55 countries did. This year, in September, we will have the Climate Summit in New York, and there will be a new call for all countries to join this coalition and to explicitly state that you will introduce just transition aspects in your NDCs. I think in this way we can build trust, because just transition basically is about the losers. In generally, the winners take care of themselves. We don't have to worry very much about that. But just transition is about workers being insecure and might lose their job. And only if you get them with you, then we will be able to make progress with climate policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The same questions, the recommendation from Ms. Legaspi.
Thank you again. I'd like to make some 4 points on the recommendations, and these are essentially also in response to the challenges that were mentioned earlier. One is the need for better coordination. We need better coordination and collaboration with all partners and stakeholders, and essentially that means we have to sustain this social dialogue with all stakeholders. And of course, the role of the private sector in the design and implementation of skills development programs is very crucial and needs to be further strengthened and expanded. In fact, we go for the notion that the industry knows better what jobs need to be developed and how these skills can be developed. So it is important that we involve them in these skills development initiatives. Second is we need to strengthen and capacitate institutions and sustain institutional mechanisms and the key players. I think at this stage there's a need to further inform the major key stakeholders on just transition and the future of work. Third one is that skills for just transition and the future of work should be dealt with not only at the national level, but also at the global level. Climate change and its impact on economic and employment landscape is a global phenomenon, and the support of countries, including international organizations and development partners, is critical and important. I think I made that 3 points as some recommendations.
Thank you very much. I changed the order a bit just because we had 3 men first and then all women, so I thought I'd mix it up slightly. So now it's for you, Mr. Berrera, for your recommendations.
I like that because you don't know what to expect and when it's going to be your turn. And okay, 2 minutes, 2 ideas. Maybe one thing that I've had a few thoughts about is the fact that well, today we're talking about the green transition. A few months ago, I was at a TVET conference dealing with the numerical transition. I really believe that there's a strong link to do between these 2 transitions that are main transitions that we're living through, because one feeds the other and one can be steered by the other. I'll just say one example. If you think of smart grids is a way of better using our energy, and that's something that's made possible, that's linked to numerical tools that today are developing really fast. So the same figures that we've been that we are shown before about job losses and gains were shown in terms of numerical transition. I think that is a strong point to make, to link those 2 thoughts and policy coordinations due to those 2 transitions. The other one is, Roberto mentioned that before, I think Sheena as well, the uncertainty of what's ahead of us. So far, we've based skills development on analyzing what's the economy, the jobs in the economy, the needs that we have, and turn them into training programs. We don't know what it's going to be like in 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. So we cannot continue, I think, base our skills development strategies on that analysis. We should rather concentrate on adaptability and adaptability for future work, future jobs that we don't know what they are at this moment, but that we do know that people will be able to work through those if they've got certain soft skills. We've mentioned soft skills, and that's something that I think everybody agrees on. And the other one is the big picture. I think that when we talk about environment, we talk about life cycle of products, and it's important to have this big picture to know where you are in the job that you're going to do in the future.
Thank you very much. I turn immediately to Ms. Mulaisi.
Thank you very much. I thought we were still switching it up. So I'll jump straight into what my recommendations are. So with the example of what we've seen in South Africa, I think firstly, when we enter into platforms of social dialogue, we need to get a firm understanding from constituencies as to what they believe a just transition means specifically to them. What we found is that a just transition can be different for organized labor, can be different for organized business, as well as community. So understand what it means for each constituency, and in your process of developing skills and in your process of developing policy, integrate the interpretations of various stakeholders. Stakeholders want to feel like they are heard. They want to feel like their issues are important. So it's very important that as you then get into the process of social dialogue, understand specifically what are the fears of constituencies, what do they aspire for, what do they think justice is. We often say in our deliberations that it's very easy to notice an injustice. If something is an injustice, you can point it out quite easily. But when you ask the question, okay, what is justice? That's when we begin to scratch our heads, because it differs according to what socioeconomic things you are then faced with directly. So it's very important for us to start at that base. What is your interpretation of a just transition, and how can we bring you forth and make you more amenable into engaging in deliberations on this just transition? I think this one is more of a responsibility for constituencies when we enter platforms of social dialogue. Do the due diligence, do the homework, engage widely in consultation with the constituency that you are representing in social dialogue. Leave no one behind. What we find is that because consultation is such a long process, and when partners need to get into consultation, they'll take whatever views they believe are the views of the constituency and run, leaving their constituency behind. So as far as possible, as best as you can, consult as widely as possible, so that when opportunities of social dialogue are available to you, you are able to then represent the views of your constituency as expediently as possible. I think the final thing that I'll well, the second last thing, if time still permits. The second last thing, we need to recognize that social dialogue is an expensive process. Getting people into one room is a costly exercise, so access to funding is very important. If we don't have the funding, unfortunately, we kill social dialogue. So there needs to be more of a willingness to access funding and make it available for the process of social dialogue. And then lastly, and I think this is the specific case that we find in South Africa, we need a perception shift with regards to social dialogue. People view it as a tedious process. It takes too long. It slows down implementation on things they would like to do much quicker. We need to change that perception. Social dialogue enriches your policy development. It enriches various skill development platforms. So as soon as we change the perception in us seeing that it's actually good for us rather than a deterrent, then we get the work done right. So definitely there's a need for a perception shift. The quicker we can do that, the better for all parties that sit at the table. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Ms. Marius Granville.
The problem with going last is sometimes you hear your ideas go before you. But just a quick summary. In terms of advancing social dialogue and for effective partnership, have a national policy that is developed through social dialogue, not a policy that's handed to the social partners. And we need to focus on bringing it home to the people so persons understand what are we talking about. In our Caribbean reality, that means if we have global warming of 2%, about, I believe it's over 25% of our airports will be compromised, as well as our road network. Tell people that so they understand what you are talking about and make it real to them. So they don't just hear a just transition and they can't translate that to what it means for them on a personal level. So that's one point in terms of having that policy developed through social dialogue and not handed to your social partners. And also, this point went before, but I'll just reinforce it. Predictability is difficult at this point in time. What we need to do is to build more resilient workers and employees, persons who have those skills that are easily adaptable, that they can move from one sector to another and they can transfer their learning easily. And I think that's what we need to focus on as opposed to building skills for specific industries or sectors. So I'll end there.
Thank you very much. I think we got a long list of very valuable recommendations that we can all take home. Now, as I said, we started 10 minutes late. I hope I'm allowed to eat up 10 minutes of your break and also 10 minutes of the break of the translators up there. We are now opening the floor for questions. I would say depending on how much we see, if we have 3 to 4 questions, and then whoever feels responsible to answer the question, we answer it from the panel. So there's one intervention there.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brian Kohler, Industrial Global Union. With all respect, it is not the employer community, at least not on its own, that should define what training and education today's and tomorrow's workers are entitled to for the benefit only of employers. This is a transformative moment for humanity. We must ask people themselves what they want and need, whether they're young workers or workers being displaced from sunsetting industries. What do they need? What do they want to meet her or his dreams or goals and to reach his or her human potential to the best benefit of themselves, their families, their communities, and the cultures that depend on them. The concept of a just transition is for the benefit of workers, not for the benefit of employers, although they will benefit indirectly if they do not take a narrow and short-term view. We have to allow people to define themselves, not create bureaucracies that dictate to workers what training will give them the skills that someone else, but not themselves, desire. The disruptive technologies of the Green Revolution and the Fourth Industrial Revolution could deliver a transformative future, a bright future with greater equality and access, leisure and learning, a higher quality of life and less drudgery. Why then are we being asked to work longer hours under worse and more precarious conditions, never achieving a pension that will allow retirement with dignity? It is because the only logic and the only force driving the introduction of these greener and advanced technologies is cost reduction and so-called shareholder value. This logic will not create a sustainable society and will certainly not create a humane society. What is the role of education? What is the role of civilization? If a displaced worker wants to pursue education in art, or a career in music rather than attempt to retrain as yet another computer programmer, it should be supported. Does society not benefit from more artists and musicians? The narrow definition of employable skills, usually defined, of course, by employers, is not a future that a civilized society should embrace, no matter how much we all want decent jobs. And if you want workers to support the transition to a sustainable future, that future has to sound good to them. No one will fight for a bleak future. Nobody will trade what they have now for a grim future. You need us, no matter how many robots you create. As an old trade union song put it, it is bread that we fight for, but we fight for roses too. Specific job skills are important, so of course let us talk about them. They are necessary, but they are not sufficient. A truly just transition to a sustainable future is much more than that, and as has been said in this House, requires a people-centered approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was rather a statement than a question, and I'm sure there are reactions on the panel on this one. Let us just collect the 3 or 4 questions first, and then we go to the answers. Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you for this interesting discussion. I'm working at the ILO on gender and just transition and on indigenous peoples' issues. Now, it has been highlighted that just transition is inclusive and it must be inclusive. And in this regard, how can it better address gender inequalities when it comes to skills development, given that occupational segregation is real, and even in the green economy, gender inequalities can easily seep in as we move ahead if it is not addressed from the very outset. So how can skills development policies or skills policies more broadly better also engage with gender policies and environmental policies together? And my second question, very quickly, is also to do with old skills, not just new skills in the green economy. And in this case, I refer to what the Paris Agreement calls traditional knowledge. For instance, what is used by indigenous and tribal peoples in managing forests, managing natural resources, in agriculture. Now, figures in Brazil, for instance, indicate that indigenous and tribal peoples managed forests have 27 times less carbon emissions. Evidently, they have some skills that we need to draw on. And these skills are traditional skills. They are not new skills. So how can these be recognized, be honed further? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see a hand over there. Yes?
Good morning, esteemed panel. My name is Simba. I'm from Zimbabwe. And my question basically centers around issues of climate change, issues of agriculture and renewable energy. I've noticed in my journey for entrepreneurship, for example, that certain policies and procedures will pretty much pose a challenge to your endeavors. And I'll name one instance in particular. The greatest threat to forests in my country is from the tobacco industry, right? Because farmers, small-scale farmers, chop down trees for curing of tobacco. Policies from donors dictate that they don't talk to tobacco. But if you want to do rural electrification in Africa, especially for communities that can afford to pay for the electricity, only farmers contracted under tobacco farms have that capacity. So yes, tobacco farmers or the tobacco industry is responsible for cutting down of trees. But at the same time, if you're looking at resilient communities that can afford to pay for renewable energy, for alternative energy sources, they're only provided that means by the tobacco industry. So if donors don't talk to the tobacco industry, do we not think that we are not going to go anywhere? Because farmers will continue to chop down trees and will continue to work with the tobacco industry because that is actually where they get their livelihoods.
Thank you very much. There's one more. I wish there was a woman asking a question.
Yes, only one thing. You have forget the impact of the immigration in the green jobs. I would like to know something about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? Okay, thank you.
Rosemary Rodríguez, de la Confederación de Trabajadores de Costa Rica. He escuchado en todas las exposiciones que le hacen énfasis al diálogo social y bueno, he escuchado también algunas experiencias, pero cuando me ubico en mi país, realmente yo siempre le he preguntado, por ejemplo, al ministro de Trabajo, ¿a qué se refiere con diálogo social real, verdad? En donde están los empleadores, gobierno y trabajadores. Normalmente, hasta el día de hoy, lo que yo veo es que Gobierno y empleadores van de la mano, no así con los trabajadores, que somos un sector importante. Entonces, si nos enfocamos en las políticas, ¿verdad?, sobre las prácticas verdes, pues entonces lo veo un poquito difícil en el sentido de que el concepto de diálogo social, el que estoy escuchando yo y en el que yo creo, no lo estoy viendo todavía. Entonces, quisiera yo espero en el transcurso del día llevarme una mayor claridad y seguridad sobre este concepto. Y ojalá, pues que realmente en mi país se entienda realmente este concepto como debe ser y se aplique. Era un comentario más que una pregunta.
Thank you very much. Still, I am sure it will provoke Thank you very much for your question. I would suggest we stay in the order that we had before, because I saw that Roberto is very keen to answer and to react.
Well, I have to. And I'm not sure whether there was a question there. It was more a statement of. But that's precisely what we have to overcome. This ideological approach, which means cooperating with employers, means a narrow approach because they just will look just for their own benefits. That's wrong. That's precisely what makes systems failure, because the needs of what's going to happen in terms of skills are very much in the mind of many employers. So if you really think that you are going to make a difference just ignoring them, not collaborating effectively with them, you are totally, totally wrong. So we have to go further just to dissipate this ideological prejudice, I would say. There was also a question related to gender and environment skills, which was quite pertinent. I will leave to others which perhaps have more skills on this area, because I think it's quite a pertinent remark. The same related to the old skills. I mean, to some extent, we have to capture and recognize those traditional skills that are critically important for a just transition perspective. And you refer to the indigenous experience, and I find that quite interesting. Our colleagues from Zimbabwe, I know you know that we are very much with the same approach of you. How on earth you can make a difference on these sectors that will have a strong green component if you do not collaborate with the industry, because they are like demonized by the international community. This means losing jobs. This means not again anticipating transitions. Of course, here in the ILO, we had a big battle, a big discussion on migration, and the perspective of employers, the perspective of business is ILO should overcome the right-based approach. There are important conventions for migrant workers, but we need to really focus making the difference on integrating migrant workers, and in order to do that, we need really ambitious programs on skills for migrant workers. That's now an initiative that has been undertaken here in the ILO, and I have to say, modestly speaking, that was a push that we gave strongly during the last ILC discussion 2 years ago. I cannot agree more on the need also to have an effective perspective when you talk about migrants linked to a skills development from the very beginning. As for the Costa Rica representative of the workers, you referred that in your country, perhaps the reality is the social dialogue goes very much hand in hand between employers and governments, but not the workers. But that's also wrong. Okay? I mean, I don't know. I don't have the insights on your country, but in many other countries, perhaps it's a different thing. Okay? But at the end of the day, you will never also succeed if you on social dialogue. You do not bring the workers' perspective effectively. I don't have any objection. On the contrary, I'm very on your side.
Thanks a lot. Okay, so as everybody wants to answer, let's keep the order. So then it would be Mr. Divi.
Thank you. I think really that the points made by the colleagues from Industrial, from the workers, are not so much an ideological discussion. I think and it was also illustrated by the sister from Costa Rica, it's just fact-based. So it's also what I said before. In many countries, we are not at the table. So what do you want about effective social dialogue policies if you're not invited, if you're not at the table? Second point is, and that's also what's referred to with the colleague from Zimbabwe was indicating, yeah, you need people at the table with correct capacity, who are informed and who can participate in a constructive way in the dialogue. And that means investment, as our sister Lebo also said before. Social dialogue doesn't come for free. It's an investment that we all have to do together, and we can all reap together benefits from. Our colleague Rishabh from the ILO mentioned the importance of indigenous knowledge, and that we should not only focus on not a very strict view on opportunistic, pragmatic view on technical knowledge linked to technological innovation and so on. I do agree very much with that. Not everything is market-based and have to have direct returns for the well-being of our society. We definitely have to look further than that. Social innovation, for example, is often very crucial. We see, to give just one example, what I mean with this, in companies often energy efficiency is very important to reduce emissions. And mostly, this is not a question of putting a new machine or introducing new technologies. It's about capacity building for the people working with the machines. It's the culture of work, how the employees on the work floor are dealing with the technologies, the process that they are working with, and the culture that there exists on participation on the work floor with the people. And that's crucial to get the trust and to make real progress in the transition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I turn to Mr. Berera, I was just wondering, could you please repeat your question, because I'm not sure, you were so kind to have it put very brief. I'm not sure whether we actually all got the question.
Sorry. Yes, Ricardo Guisado from the Spanish Foundation for Training and Employment. Yes, I would like to know the relationships between immigration or migration and skilled jobs. And green jobs. I think there is a strong link between both concepts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So if the following speakers can answer to this question as well. So Mr. Berera?
I don't know, I'm a migrant myself. Well, I'm not sure I can provide you with a very precise answer on that. The workforce is based on the people that are also migrants, and these days we've had a strong impact of migrations, obviously, throughout Europe, and that comes into the picture of skills development. Also because the input of skills in certain areas is a real chance for some countries that otherwise wouldn't have those skills. So that's as far as I can say at this stage on this issue. Maybe my fellow panelists can answer better that question. I'd also like to share, just to add to what's already been said, the practicality of social dialogue as for who decides what's the skills to be developed. Our experience, as I mentioned before, is that we turn to both employers and employees, trade unions, to figure out what is needed for the country, for the economy, for the people. The decision that is made to develop or not such a skills program is based on an agreement, a vote that is shared between those main partners of the social dialogue. And that way, that tends to put people at ease and develop these programs with the respect of the need for development of economy and the need to have people come with us to this development.
Thank you very much. Ms. Legaspi?
Thank you. Skills Development Agency, I'd like to highlight the role of industry or employers in our skills development efforts. First is, of course, to provide the signals for which skills need to be developed, because technical vocational education and training I think the ultimate outcome that we want is employment, whether it's wage employment, self-employment, or any form of employment. That's the outcome that we need. So we need those signals and coming from employment. But that does not mean that you do not consult the other stakeholders in the skills development process itself. In fact, our own TESDA board, which is the highest policy-making body, is predominated by the private sector. In fact, there are more members of the labor union than the industry itself, and they have a say on what skills need to be prioritized, what kind of interventions are needed. In fact, in prioritizing the skills that need to be developed, they integrated already, put a lens on in terms of green skills and green jobs. The second point on indigenous peoples and gender mainstreaming, we are pleased to note that at least in the Philippines, we are mainstreamed the women or gender and development in technical vocational education and training. We have a TESDA Women Center that promotes non-traditional trades or higher value adding skills development opportunities for women. We have participated also, or we are in partnership with ILO on Women in STEM project. And because we have integrated green competencies in our training regulations, women also benefit from these training programs that are imbued with green competencies. We have recognized that our indigenous peoples need different approaches in terms of skills development, in terms of the type of skills that need to be developed, and that is well recognized. That's why we adopt a more flexible approach for developing these skills. We are looking at developing more culturally sensitive standards or curriculum that will adapt to the nature of the practices, the culture of our indigenous peoples. We are in partnership with our National Commission on Culture and Arts, as well as the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples, in pursuing these initiatives. Of course, for migration and skills development in the Philippines, skills development has been an intervention to protect our workers, because we believe that our workers who are properly trained can have a say on the kind of jobs that they can be offered and the remuneration that they are given, especially for our overseas Filipino workers. And this kind of skills that are provided to them, if they come from the training programs that are developed in TESDA, are imbued with green competencies. But that's so far as attribution to green skills, but it's more on skills development in general in relation to migration.
Thank you. Ms. Mundaisi?
Thank you. I'll be very brief. Bert covered a majority of the things that I would have wanted to say, but just to address the issue of gender parity. I think that's the beauty of this term called a just transition, that the justice element is much at play within it, so we can't dictate to any constituency what they feel justice is. So very much if a constituencies need to be appraised, to then bring the gender parity issue to platforms of social dialogue, so that when we are developing whatever policy, whatever skills development plan, we make sure very much that the issue of gender parity is accurately captured, because for a lot of people, that's what justice means. And I think for the last question quickly, if I captured the question correctly, we were making reference to whether you can see the impact of social dialogue on the ground. And I think that puts a greater responsibility of those of us who do sit in platforms of social dialogue, that after we've engaged, after we've won whatever victories that we have in a platform of social dialogue, how best do we communicate that to the rest of society? Because what I've seen is that we have victories, we develop wonderful policy, and we then walk away from it. And nobody knows outside those who are participating in the actual dialogue. So it's very important for us to then be able to communicate what the victories are, so that people know that social dialogue is at play and it is working.
Thank you very much. And once again, last but not least, Ms. Meyers-Granville.
Okay, very quickly, I will just add 2 points. That I believe that sometimes we are limited by what we do or do not know. And therefore, when we look at new employment areas and skills that might be needed coming out of the green economy, that's just opening up the mindset of persons so they know that there are opportunities that exist or that might be coming on stream in a particular area. It doesn't mean that you're eliminating other jobs that existed, but you're opening up additional avenues for persons. So in terms of asking employees what they need to, what they wish to do, what they wish to be trained in, I believe persons always have a choice in terms of what training they do. What's the sense? Most employers will not send an employee on training when they know the employee does not wish to attend. So it's about creating avenues and additional opportunities for persons that they can take advantage of. And just quickly on the comment of social partnership and social dialogue, I come from a country with a very rich and strong history of social dialogue. And so it seems strange to me to hear that where it does not function. Yes, I'm relatively young, so I don't know about a Barbados before social dialogue. But I can say from experience that it definitely does work. It works when you bring all of the parties together, when you can really discuss the issues and have a national policy and agenda to deal with the issues at hand. So I would always advocate for strong social dialogue, and therefore you can touch all of those issues that persons presented, issues of migration, issues of gender balance, issues of skill development, training, etc. All of those should be discussed as part of your social dialogue. And once it's working in the way it should work, I'm sure it will redound to the benefit of all the participants.
Thank you very much, and thank you specifically for letting us end on a positive note. I really, really want to thank all the speakers. I think this was a very rich discussion. Let us give them a round of applause for their contributions.